Very good. All right. Well, in the interest of, I know people are on their lunch break, we can get started. This webinar will be recorded, so fear not if you're just getting in. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us for the very first presentation in our training-focused webinar series to kick off 2026. New year, new summits, am I right? My name is Mary, and I'm the guide manager at Alpine Ascents. I am hyped for today's session, which is all about practical evidence-based breathing techniques for high altitude athletes. Anthony Lorubbio, founder and head coach of Recal Training, is going to walk us through how intentional breath work can improve oxygen efficiency, strengthen respiratory muscles, boost endurance in demanding environments, and support both acclimatization and recovery. This is Anthony's second time presenting with us, and I'll be honest, his last talk was a total game changer. I have since largely repented from my lifelong mouth breathing ways. Anthony draws on years of research and real-world experience with working with climbers on Denali, Aconcagua, and Kilimanjaro. Whether you're preparing for your first climb on Rainier or fine-tuning performance for a bigger expedition, like Ama Dablam, this is practical training you can actually use, and it may just become your secret weapon in the mountains. With that, I'll turn it over to Anthony in just a sec. But during the presentation, if you have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A box and we'll tackle them at the end. With that, Anthony, over to you.
All right. Holy cow. That was setting the bar pretty high, Mary. Thanks. We'll see if I can deliver second time around now with everybody. Shout out to everybody in the chat. This is pretty lively, it seems, which is really cool. We've got Richard headed to Everest soon. Howard from Mexico. We've got some Washington folks, which is fun. Keep that chat lively. I'm going to do my best to be looking at the presentation that I'll be sharing with you and also the chat. But of course, as Mary mentioned, throw in any questions and we will definitely cover them at the end. All right. So, hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I want to frame the conversation that we're about to share about breathwork training by sharing with you a little article, just a couple of bits out of an article. You might be familiar with this person who writes in Sweat Science, Alex Hutchinson, but I think this positions our conversation really well for today. And he says in this article, train your breathing muscles to prepare for altitude. When you head to altitude, you have to breathe more deeply and more frequently to compensate for the scarcity of oxygen in the thin air. The muscles that you use in particular to inhale have to work way harder than normal. In fact, they consume 15 to 30% of the already limited oxygen that you inhale at altitude, and those muscles can eventually get tired. So training those muscles should prepare you to handle the extra work of breathing at altitude. This is what we're going to talk about today. What it's like for the body to go into high altitude and what type of toll that takes on our respiratory system. So I want to share a little story just to kick things off with you. I want to introduce you to Umar Latif. Umar lives and trains at 200 meters above sea level. So shout out to all of you that live at sea level. Umar is just like you. He lives in Lahore, Pakistan. His goal was to summit Kosar Gang, which is a 6,000 meter peak in the Karakoram mountain range. After training at sea level using breathwork training, he experienced this. After doing breathwork training, I saw an immediate improvement in my breathing, and on the mountain, my blood oxygen saturation levels remained high. He is proud to have made it to the summit of Kosar Gang after training and living at sea level, and this is him at sunrise on top of that peak. I want you to take from Umar, hopefully, the fact that doing breathwork training from wherever you are in the world can help you prepare for whatever mountain challenge that you have. So, the agenda that we have for today, pretty simple and straightforward. We're going to talk about what exactly breathwork training is, what challenges your respiratory system faces at altitude, what the research says about what you can do from a breathwork training standpoint and make a difference for you on the mountain. My goal, though, that's the agenda of what we're going to cover. My goal for you today is, number one, that we make it interactive. I don't want this just to be me as a talking head talking at you the entire time. We're going to make this interactive. Number two, we're going to make it interesting. And yes, science. That means we will be going through some science today. So if there's any moment that you're just bogged down by maybe some of the science here, take a couple of deep breaths, read my hat, just breathe, and we'll get through the science together. And the last thing that I want to accomplish here today is make it clear for you where you can go from here. This is going to be an action-packed hour-long presentation. I am trying to pack as much information in here as possible, but the real work is going to happen outside of this presentation if you do want to use breathwork training to prepare for your climb. And so I'm going to make it very clear to you what you can do from this point forward. To begin with the interaction, I want to play a little game. This game is going to exist the entire duration of our webinar today. It's called X marks the spot. Anytime that you see a letter that is at the beginning of a word and it is bold and underlined, I want you to write that letter down just on the side, notepad, pencil, paper, wherever maybe you're taking notes. Just write down those letters that are bold and underlined, just the first letter in the word, and that will be your X marks the spot. Okay, with that, I want to introduce myself to you because I know Mary just shared quite a bit about me, but let me explain a little bit more. I'm just an ordinary guy, okay? I don't have a particularly long list of mountaineering achievements. The first time I go to 6,000 meters will be my first time. The next time I do that will be my first time. I also am not an endurance athlete by any means, which I think is what's interesting about this is I am just an ordinary guy. I somehow stumbled my way into learning all about breathwork training and all the what the research has to say about what it can do to change your body and get you ready for high altitude and how it can increase your endurance and all these sorts of things. And I wanted to test out all of that science and research on myself. And the first way that I did that was I ran a full marathon, but to train for the marathon, I didn't do any running. I did only breathwork training. And when I ran the marathon, I taped my mouth shut and I breathed entirely through my nose for the duration of the marathon. That enabled me to, number one, postpone fatigue that happened inside the body, and number two, kept my heart rate under control. It really was a great test to see what you can do with breathwork training, but I wanted to take it outside of just a sea level based run, and I took it into the mountains. And I pulled together a lot of the high altitude simulation breathwork training, and I tested it out on myself. I trained from sea level, and I went to my first ever 14er. I didn't have any exposure at high altitude prior to that experience, and I arrived right from sea level to 14er. I also did this with my mouth shut, and it really showed me firsthand what you can do with breathwork training from anywhere in the world and how you can apply it to high altitude. I since have packed a lot of the things I tested out on myself and put it into very big workshops that I've been able to guide around the world, big stages that I've been able to speak on, and really develop and expand a coaching practice that's touched hundreds of people, ordinary people, doing extraordinary things on the mountains around the world. I call this the army of normal folks that have done incredible things in the mountains. And these are real photos of real people that have done breathwork training and done great things on the mountain. So the seed I'm planting here is that it doesn't take some special mountaineer, some special endurance athlete to use breathwork training from anywhere in the world and apply it to your preparation and then succeed on the mountain. Now, I see an X marks the spot, by the way. I want to pause for a moment and do a little survey. So be survey or assessment number one. And this is called the location of movement. So here's where some interaction is going to begin. The location of movement is a survey that we use in our breathwork training programs, and it will help you identify where exactly you breathe, where the movement happens when you breathe. And it works like this. Place one hand up on your chest and one hand on your belly. Look down the front of your body. And please join me in doing this right now. If you're seated, standing, whatever you're doing, if you're walking or running right now, maybe pause. Take a look down the front of your body and where do you notice the movement happening when you breathe? Take a few breaths just like that. breathing and zones of movement for breathing can really be divided into three different parts, three different zones. Zone 1 would be your lower belly or abdomen space. Zone 2 would be the mid-chest rib cage area. Zone 3 would be upper chest shoulders area. So which one of those zones did you feel your own movement happening? And I would love for you to pop that into the chat window just so we can see and identify. Thank you, Chris, Howard, Pilar, Luca. All right, popping it in there. Good. I see some ones, I see some threes, I see some twos, kind of all over the my chest-ish. All right, quite a few answers there. So you might be wondering, was my location of movement, my LOM, good? What are the others? I mentioned number one. What are some of the other surveys and assessments that we're going to do, and how can I improve them? My answer to you is stick around and find out. I'm leaving you in a little cliffhanger here. We're going to talk about which zone is the best one to develop the proper oxygenation that your body requires, but that is going to happen at the end. So take note of that LOM, put it to the side, and we'll come back soon. I want to talk now about what challenges that you face at altitude. And this is where we're going to get a little bit into some of the science behind this, but I want to make a disclaimer. That disclaimer is I am not a medical doctor. I am well trained in a very niche part of the overall anatomy and physiology of what happens at altitude, but I am not a medical doctor. So at any time when you're looking to go at high altitude, of course, do your due diligence, meet with your doctor, discuss how your body may react to altitude. So with that, I want to share with you three key things that happen at altitude. The first one I want to talk about is the fact that when you arrive at altitude, most people experience an increase in their ventilation, which is just a fancy way of saying your respiratory rate. So your breathing amount, the amount of breaths you take per minute, that increases. Number two, people experience over an acclimatization period, which Mary had mentioned that at the beginning. We'll talk about how breathwork training can help with acclimatization. But over the period of time that you're on the mountain, gradually going up, you may experience an increase in your hemoglobin concentration. How many red blood cells that you actually have in your bloodstream. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about of what happens at altitude related to the respiratory system is you may experience a decrease in your oxygen saturation, specifically the blood oxygen saturation levels. This is also known as your SpO2, if you're familiar with that. If you use something like a pulse oximeter, something like that, this gauges your SpO2. If you were to use that at high altitude and you just arrived there, you would probably notice your blood oxygen saturation level goes down. This impacts you in a few different ways. One key way is that it decreases the aerobic power and the total oxygen uptake capacity that your body has. In other words, your VO2 max. So these are the three key things I want to drill in on. We're going to go into these areas one at a time, but I think it's important to just note how exactly does breathwork training help with these three issues, challenges, whatever you want to call them, that you face when you arrive at altitude. So together, over the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, we're going to make the connection. Zooming back out, looking at our three quote unquote challenges, breathwork training, at least the way that I coach it, can be split into three key sides. And the first side is what I would call mechanical efficiency. Learning good breathing habits can make a huge difference, and particularly that's related to that increase of ventilation. And I'll talk a bit about, more about that here shortly. Number two, the second side of breathwork training as I coach it, is you can make high altitude adaptations in your body that will help with that acclimatization process. And the third side of breathwork training is respiratory muscle training, actually strengthening the muscles that do your breathing. So let's zoom in on this first area, the mechanical efficiency side of the equation. It is key when starting a breathwork training program to, number one, identify the poor habits that you have, but then unlearn those to make room for better breathing habits. And when I say better breathing, Mary mentioned it at the beginning, eliminating mouth breathing is extremely key, and developing the nasal breathing habit. Breathing through your nose is vitally important to moisturize the air as it comes into your lungs. It filters the air as it comes in. Breathing through your nose provides a bit of resistance, which then engages the diaphragm more, which will help send oxygen deeper into the lungs, which oxygenates the body more efficiently. It also will eliminate dry, cold air from being injected directly into your lungs, which may cause some bronchoconstriction and maybe exercise-induced asthma. All these things are impacted more on people at high altitude with that dry, cold air that exists there. So it's vitally important to eliminate the mouth breathing habit and develop a nasal breathing habit. Quickly, another couple of things is, as I mentioned, diaphragmatic breathing and slow and steady breathing. Breathing more slowly actually, ironically, oxygenates your body more efficiently. This is particularly of use at sea level. When you're at altitude, though, you actually want to do something a little bit different, which I'll discuss in a little bit. But most people breathe more times than they need to, and the most optimal oxygenation happens actually at around a 6 breaths per minute basis, again, near sea level. Most people breathe 15, 16 times per minute. So just for comparison's sake, that's typically due to stress levels, etc. All right, let's look at the research and what that has to say about this first side of breathwork training, the mechanical efficiency side. There was a study done that wanted to take a look at what slow, deep breathing would do for people's oxygenation level, their SpO2, when arriving at altitude. And so they set up a study that was done with people that live at or near sea level, lowlanders as they call them, unfairly, I should say. Nobody's low, just living at sea level. But after arriving at 4,600 and 5,400 meters, they changed the way that they breathed by taking slow, deep breaths and then analyzed what happened to their blood oxygen saturation levels. And in conclusion of this study, what they found was that the SpO2 levels increased on average between 7.6% and 9.3%, just by changing the way that you breathe. Specifically, they breathe through the nose, they breathe more slowly than they had prior, and they breathe deep into the lungs. By changing the way you breathe, you can change your blood oxygen saturation levels. That is what this piece of research is showing. So let's zoom back out, once again, looking at our 3 areas that we're talking about here. And let's look at that second side of breathwork training, the high altitude adaptation side. Specifically, I want to talk about what you can do for mountain simulation. And I see another X marks the spot. Little note if you're jotting down these letters. Using a few specialized breathwork training protocols, specifically some hypoxic breathing exercises, you can do quite a few things that are going to really help your body when you arrive at altitude. In particular, you can increase your hemoglobin concentration from anywhere in the world using these hypoxic breathing exercises, and that's going to subsequently increase your VO2 max, your total oxygen uptake capacity, which is vitally important to perform better at high altitude. The second thing that you can do using these simulation exercises, specifically something called carbon dioxide tolerance breathing exercises, you can most importantly retrain the chemoreceptors in your brain to not panic as much with that feeling of breathlessness. Therefore, you will feel less out of breath at higher and higher intensity levels of exercise or trekking or climbing on the mountain. And if you feel less out of breath, then you can have a decrease in your rate of perceived exertion, RPE. RPE is directly tied to somebody's endurance. It's basically if your mind is thinking that you're not working as hard, it's going to allow you to go further, if that makes sense. A lower RPE is directly tied to somebody being able to have more endurance on the mountain. And the second thing that you can do is if you feel less out of breath, then you can actually retain control of your breathing. You can prevent hyperventilation, which actually decreases the oxygen levels that are getting into your muscle tissue and organs and places that need it on the mountain. You do want to prevent hyperventilation. So This is the high altitude adaptation side of the equation. Let's look at some research that specifically dived into something called intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training. Again, this is a specific type of breathing training protocol around hypoxia that can simulate hypoxia for the body and its impact on the hemoglobin concentration and VO2 max. There was a study done with subjects that 3 times a week for 8 weeks spent 30 to 45 minutes doing these types of breathing protocols. And what they found in conclusion was after that period of time, they had a 5.35% higher hemoglobin concentration in their blood, which resulted in a nearly 11% increase in their VO2 max. This is quite astonishing, especially considering that the people that were a part of this study were already well-trained athletes. So that type of jump in the VO2 max is extremely unique. We can just put it that way. So as you can see, doing high altitude simulation exercises, hypoxic driven exercises can make a huge difference in your blood physiology. All right, that is a lot of science. We're going to do a second assessment now. We're going to shake things up a bit, okay? The second assessment here is called the carbon dioxide tolerance test, or CO2-T for short. The way that this works is very simple. From a seated position, I want you to take a normal breath in through your nose and then a normal breath out. And then you're going to begin a really deep inhale. You're going to fill up your lungs as much as you can. And when you reach the very top of that inhale, you then begin an extremely slow exhale through your nose, maybe using the Ujjayi breathing with a throat lock, and just try to extend the exhale as long as you can. So you're allowing as little amount of air out of your nose as possible because you're trying to make this as long of an exhale as possible. When you get to the point that you need to take a new breath, maybe the stress of breathlessness has overcome you and you need to take a new breath, or you've just ran out of air and squeezed everything out that you can, that's when you're going to look at the screen and take a note of the time that's on the screen. And that will be your personal carbon dioxide tolerance test. So I've got a timer on the screen. We're going to do this together, okay? Everybody sit up nice and straight in the chair that I do advise you to do this from a seated position. Sitting up nice and straight, relax your shoulders. Let's take a normal breath in through the nose and then a normal breath out. And now begin that deep inhale. Fill up your lungs as much as you can. Fill up, fill up, fill up. And now begin that slow exhale. It's like air is just barely leaking out of your nose. Again, you're trying to have as little amount of air coming out as possible so that you can extend this exhale as long as possible. And as you exhale, just relax. I'm going to let the timer run for another 20 seconds or so. When you run out of air or have to take a new breath, just take note of the time that's on the screen. When you're out of air, just come back to normal breathing and hang out for everybody else to finish. We're over the 60-second mark. I'll let it go for maybe 5 more seconds. If you're still going, nice job. I'm very impressed. If you want to, you can throw your time in the chat window, just so I have an idea on where we landed kind of across the board. That'd be super helpful as we go. The time that was on the screen is your personal carbon dioxide tolerance test. And we'll talk at the end about what that means for you as a baseline leading into some breathwork training. Okay, cool. And thank you for those that are dropping it in there. I see a 34. We've got a good range. I see a 34. I've got a 64, 70 seconds. Woo, nice. Good work. All right, cool. I'll keep it rolling. So, where were we? Let's continue. We're looking at these 3 things that happen physiologically to your body when you arrive at altitude. Let's talk about this last piece of the equation, the third side of breathwork training, which is respiratory muscle training. So what do I mean when I say respiratory muscle training? The muscles I'm specifically referring to are your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles. Your diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle. You can see it in the top left there in the images. It sits just beneath your lungs, and when you inhale, it flattens out. That makes enough room inside your lungs to bring in air, and as you exhale, it kind of domes or curls back up. So your breathing is a constant flattening and doming up, if doming is a word, is a verb, of your diaphragm, right? Your diaphragm is your primary breathing motor muscle. Secondarily, you do have these intercostal muscles. Some set for the inhales, some set is for the exhales. Your abdomen is also a breathing muscle. So when I refer to respiratory muscles, this is the set of muscles that I'm talking about. So with respiratory muscle training, or RMT, you can do quite a few of really special things. With stronger muscles, when you arrive at altitude, you can maintain a higher blood oxygen saturation level. This point cannot be understated here. With stronger respiratory muscles, research has shown that people then are able to maintain higher blood oxygen saturation levels at altitude. And in a moment, I will show you the research that has proven that. The second thing is, as the very first article that I talked about, the very first slide that we went through, Alex mentioned in Sweat Science, what happens at altitude is your respiratory muscles, due to the extra workload of breathing in that lower pressure air, which takes more effort to bring into your lungs, those muscles can fatigue. So training your muscles obviously will help prolong the fatigue, push it out into the future so that you can perform better. And the last thing I'll mention is that by strengthening your respiratory muscles, you then can improve your breathing economy, how efficiently you're breathing, how much energy is being used for your breathing. If you're just engaging the muscles that are designed to do your breathing, you're not needing to pull from other muscles, and that's going to help decrease your RPE, which again is tied directly to endurance. When I also talk about respiratory muscle training, I'm referring to the inspiratory muscles, the expiratory muscles, and as a result of these types of training exercises, you can then develop your lung capacity as well. So this is all kind of wrapped up in one thing here. So let's look at the literature and take a look at some research on this. And as you can see, this person is clearly practicing respiratory muscle training by eating a pizza at a base camp. I believe this is at Aconcagua. Less like respiratory muscle training, more like masseter muscle training. For those anatomy junkies out there, come on, give me some credit for knowing the jaw muscle. Okay. So, oh, I see some X marks the spot once again. I love this game of I Spy. This study looked at inspiratory muscle training and its impact on people's blood oxygen saturation levels at high altitude. So the study was done very simply. The subjects, which was a group expedition crew going to the Himalayas, before that expedition, they trained 2 times a day for 4 weeks, just very short protocol of inspiratory muscle training. And they had their blood oxygen saturation levels tested at sea level, at 400 meters, 1400 meters, 4,880, and 5,550 along the way on their expedition. In conclusion of this research, number one, they found that their inhalation strength increased by 15%. So as a result of the training, their inhalation strength, primarily their diaphragm, got stronger by 15%. And they use a special metric and how to do that. We can talk about that maybe after the fact, but I don't want to bog you down too hard by the science there. But that's great. So they got stronger on their inhalation, but did it actually translate to the mountain is really the key part of this equation. And what they found was there was no change in the subjects that did the training versus the ones that didn't at any level below 4,000 meters. However, for those that did do the training at the altitude of 4,800 meters and above, they experienced a 6% increase, or I should say, lack of a drop in their blood oxygen saturation levels versus those that didn't. And it was as much as 10% of a difference in blood oxygen saturation levels. That's a difference between 90% blood oxygen saturation level, which is like very mild hypoxia, and 80%, which is high level of hypoxia, right? That is a very big gap that we do not want to see on the mountain. Just by training your respiratory muscles, you are able to maintain higher blood oxygen saturation levels. So, this is the last of the research studies that I will share with you. This is really the last of the hard science here. I think it's really important to note that this science and these research studies, I consider that as a part of the lab. And as I was introducing myself to you, I'm very keen on, sure, okay, reading the research, looking at the studies, maybe being a bit skeptical of what I'm seeing, and trying to find ways to then take it out of the lab and actually onto the mountain. And that was what I started to do with some of my own personal experiments, we can call it. Then through my coaching practice, have shared it with now hundreds of athletes that have taken it to the next level, new heights, no pun intended, on the mountain. And from here on, I want to talk about the framework that we have used to bring it out of the lab and into the mountain. So if you have an expedition coming up, and I think, Richard, you were the one that's going to Everest. I'm trying to remember some of the others. I think there were some Washington climbs. If you have a climb coming up, especially with AAI, you might be down here in the bottom left, looking up at the top and saying, oh boy, this is a big mountain to climb here, right? The framework that we've created, and maybe you've already written out on your pencil and paper notes, because the game of X marks the spot was simply to write out the word summit. So hopefully you hit on all of those letters. We call it the summit framework. This is the out of the lab into the real world process. And I'll break this down piece by piece here. The S in summit stands for survey. If you remember that first survey that we did, the location of movement, that is part of the initial stage of a training preparation program where we establish baseline using really 5 key metrics that then can give you clarity of what you need to work on to help prepare you for your mountain adventure. Then once you've done the surveys and assessments, you then, a second S, which is schedule, you actually then need to schedule out the amount of time you have leading up to your expedition and how in your busy schedule can you actually fit the training and preparation into that. The U in summit stands for unlearn. We need to, once you've identified what areas of your breathing in particular that you need to fix, you then need to unlearn bad habits, because we breathe 20 to 25,000 times every single day. That means we've got a lot of muscle memory going on here. We need to unlearn bad habits to make room for good, proper, mechanically efficient breathing. That is how we can then layer on performance. I'm going to skip ahead to the integration component, because I think it's really key here to note that as you unlearn bad habits, you then can start to integrate it into all of your training and all of your breathing every single day, including when you're sleeping. And that can result in more performance in less time by just breathing better and more efficiently during training. The first M in Summit stands for muscle. This is where we start to work on muscle strengthening protocols and exercises. And once again, once you have stronger breathing muscles, you can then integrate it into your training, and then you're getting more out of your training. And this integration cycle can continue to exist. The second M in Summit stands for mountain. This is the point of the process, which at this point would probably be about 4 weeks out from your expedition. By the way, the whole process can start at any time before an expedition, whether you've got 6 months or 2 months. The second M here, where we really start to go into the mountain simulation exercises, that takes place about 4 weeks out from the expedition, just to give you a general sense of timing. From those hypoxic breathing exercises, carbon dioxide tolerance breathing exercises, That then also will feed into this integration cycle, and you're getting more out of your training and preparation. Now, the T in Summit, where we end, is test. We want to retest what we surveyed from the beginning and see what our progress looked like. And by the way, through this process, you're still tracking progress. The second part of the T is taper. You want to taper off, especially on the muscle work that you're doing, muscular strength building, to taper off right before your expedition to recover beforehand. And then lastly, the T stands for trust. You ultimately want to trust that you've done enough preparation and can land on the mountain and be ready to take it on. And hopefully, you'll see yourself dancing on the summit. This is the process that we have used to take breathwork training out of the lab and into the real world. And we've had hundreds of athletes at this point. Very ordinary, I will call them, athletes do extraordinary things on the mountains. I do call this again our army of, quote, normal folks. I'm very proud of how many people have done really big things on the mountain over the years now. So let's do some breathwork training. We're going to get interactive once again. I am going to introduce you to one breathwork training protocol. It's very simple. It's one that I felt comfortable doing in a webinar. It's not going to take too much time, and I'm also not fearful that we're running into any sort of risk situations here. But I do want to note, if you have any underlying heart conditions, or if you're pregnant, I do not recommend that you do this next protocol, okay? But if that is not your case, and you feel like you can take this on within reason, I do invite you to join me for one breathwork training protocol, and that is called the maximum breathlessness test. The way that this works is you will need a space to walk, okay? And if you don't have space to walk, maybe a long hallway or walking in a circle in your office, and hopefully you don't have too many eyeballs on you as you do this kind of thing. If you don't have that type of space, you can walk, march in place, kind of in an exaggerated way. But we're going to basically take a breath hold after an exhale, and you're going to walk as many steps as you can on that one held breath. When you're doing that, you're counting the number of steps that you're taking, and you can report that back. This is also actually one of our assessments, but it can be used as a breathwork training protocol as well, which is both hitting on hypoxia as well as hypercapnia, which is related to carbon dioxide tolerance that I mentioned earlier. So this is a really nice combination breathwork training protocol. This is kind of just an introductory level exercise, okay? But I wanted you to get a little bit of a taste here of breathwork training, okay? So with that, you can join me. Go ahead and stand up if in fact you're sitting down right now. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to take a normal breath in through the nose and then a normal breath out. I'm going to ask you to then pinch your nose and hold your breath, and then you will begin walking. And remember, when you're walking, if you're doing it, go ahead and pause. We haven't gone live yet. When you're walking, I want you to count the number of steps that you have taken on that one exhale hold. Note, this is not an exhale where you're squeezing the air out. You're not doing that. It's just a normal exhale out to neutral lung. Pinch your nose and hold your breath and begin walking. Okay? All right. Standing up nice and straight. Join me in taking one normal breath in through the nose and then a normal breath out. Pinch your nose and hold your breath now and begin walking at a normal hiker's pace. Count your steps and go as far as you can on this one held breath. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And if you're done, just go ahead and come back to normal breathing. If you're still going, this is amazing. All right. I'm going to assume now that everybody is pretty much done. How many steps did you take? And if you forgot the number of steps that you took, that kind of comes into play. When you feel out of breath, you go into panic mode and you might kind of lose that mental togetherness, right? Mental composure. That's fairly normal. But if you did remember the number of steps, go ahead and jot that also into the chat. I would love to see where we landed. I see quite a few Uh, oh, wow. A 60, a 30, a 57, a 15. All right, Ken, we've got some work to do. Just kidding. 32, 60. All right, good stuff. Take note of that. Okay, someone's a free diver in here. That explains something. All right. So that is your maximum breathlessness test. Yet again, another one of the assessments that we use, but it can also be used as a hypoxic hypercapnic breathwork training protocol. Imagine yourself doing some of that and going up and down a set of stairs, going up and down the side of a hill or on the mountain, or even doing an incline treadmill for a breath hold like that. That is the type of thing, I want to be clear that that's not exactly it, but the type of thing that you might be doing for that intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training style of breathwork training, which is one piece of an overall big puzzle. So how many steps? Looks like a lot of you have thrown that into the chat already. Cool. If you're wondering where you landed on the carbon dioxide tolerance test, on the maximum breathlessness test, and on that location of movement, now is finally the time that we're going to talk about that. This is a set of score ranges from Oxygen Advantage, which is a leader in breathwork training, one of the places in which I have a certification. And if you were in the 20 to 40 range on both the timing for your carbon dioxide tolerance test and the number of steps for your MBT, you likely have some signs of dysfunction to your breathing. Most likely, it's potentially over breathing and not a well-trained carbon dioxide tolerance. And therefore, you have some work to do. If you're in the 40 to 60 range, it's better. You're right on the cusp of quote unquote that threshold, dropping into functional breathing. If you were in a 60 to 80 range, that's good, I would say. If you're in the 80 to 100 range, I know I saw 95 out there. Henry, okay, show off, just kidding. That is the elite range. And this is where I would love, if you're climbing something like Everest, or, depending on other factors, including if you've had caffeine yet today, what's your food intake like. I would advise you to do these again in the morning to give yourself a really fresh baseline. But generally speaking, this is the score range that you would want to look at for these assessments. Now, on the LOM, the location of movement, if you remember that, I remember seeing quite a few ones, some twos, and even a few threes. Let's talk about which zone is best to get oxygen into your bloodstream and then subsequently into your muscle tissue and your organs that require it. If you were already guessing this, zone 1 is most optimal. You are correct. The green zone, zone 1 is where you want most of the movement happening. If your shoulders are moving, we call this a vertical breath. This is not ideal. What you want to breathe when you breathe in, especially through the nose, is to fill up the belly and feel circumferentially, feel your belly and your ribs expand 360 degrees around with each and every breath. That would be the most ideal location of movement, which translates to the most efficient, mechanically, style of breath. So I hope that helps you to recap a few things on the surveys and assessments. What I want to dive into now, and I do see some questions are coming up. I will, of course, cover some of this at the end. Thank you for those questions, Sergey as well. Let's dive into some case studies here. What people have done with breathwork training and how it's translated to the mountain. I'm going to got 3 case studies that I'll fly through together with you. The first one I want to introduce you to is Tim Fox. Tim lived in Pennsylvania near sea level, and he had the challenge of taking on Mount Rainier a couple of years ago. And this is what he has to say about his breathwork training experience. Going into the climb, I was a bit concerned that I wasn't where I needed to be from a fitness perspective, and I felt that Recal's breathwork training filled those gaps. I credit the use of the tools from the program in making my climb successful and more enjoyable, because he probably wasn't quite out of breath, or maybe avoided some low oxygen saturation levels, or maybe some altitude sickness as a whole. He says in his case that he felt no impact from the elevation, which many other sea level folks did. And he did a test on the mountain just by using one of the expedition breathing protocols that we coach. he was able to change his blood oxygen saturation level in engaging it with his pulse oximeter. So, and since returning, he's applied his breathwork training to his quote unquote normal life, and he's found it incredibly beneficial. So, this is one case study of somebody who's done some great things with respiratory muscle training, as well as an overall package of breathwork training, and it translated to Mount Rainier. Let's see how it might have translated to Everest Base Camp. So with a group of 7 folks, this is what Matt has to say, one of the people in the group. His primary concern going into Everest Base Camp was his ability to breathe, which is a very common thing that we hear when people are going to high altitude, of course. The breathwork training he did through Recal gave him techniques in how to better handle the altitude. And when he was struggling, he thought back to what he had learned in his Summit Ready breathwork training course, and it helped him to regulate his breathing and de-stress the body. And this is quite a statement here by him. His high altitude breathwork training was better than any physical training that he did to prepare for Everest Base Camp. So clearly, Matt got a lot out of a breathwork training program before his trek. The last case study, now we're really going up in elevation here. The last case study I want to identify is Aconcagua. So some of you may be familiar with it. Maybe some of you have climbed. Maybe you're headed out in the next couple of days or so to go to Aconcagua for the tail end of the climbing season there. Next, I guess, couple of months or so. So the typical success rate at Aconcagua, a mountain that's at 22,837 feet, just under 7,000 meters, typical success rate is 30 to 35%. This is across all people, guided, non-guided expeditions. We did a partnership with a guiding company last year. It was the first season, not this year. We had a 71% success rate for those that actually trained using breathwork training. So as you can see, a large jump, doubling the odds potentially for those that are doing breathwork training and having summit success. And I want to drill into one specific case study, introducing you to Dave Taylor. Dave in 2023 attempted Aconcagua, and he was unfortunately taken off the mountain, had to abort from his expedition at Camp Cholera at 6,000 meters. Again, some of you may be familiar with that. That's 1,000 meters short of the summit. In 2024, he decided he's going to go for a second attempt, but he decided to go into it with a different preparation plan. Number one, he started a mountaineering related fitness program, actually hired a coach for that. Lisa Thompson from Alpine Athletics is actually who worked with him. But number two is he added a breathwork training program with me 2 months, starting 2 months before his departure. And you can see us working together on one of our virtual calls for the training. That is Dave with a sports mask on. This is a specialized part of training. Oftentimes people call this their best friend. That's totally sarcastic. It is a part of the respiratory muscle training as well as carbon dioxide training, part of breathwork training. And as a result of his training program as a whole, I'm going to show you where his fitness scores went. And this was scores pulled from his Coros watch. So what you're going to see on the left in just a moment, a lot of data. On the left is going to be where his fitness level was for his first attempt. And then on the far right is his fitness level at the start of his second attempt. So as you can see, he was at a base fitness level of 57 for the start of his first attempt. Then when he started his mountaineering focus training program, he was at a base fitness of 76. Then at the start of breathwork training, he was at a 92. And then he went from 92 in about 2 months to 122. And that was where he started his climb from. So these are his key takeaways of how it actually translated to the mountain. As he reports, it was a night and day different experience from his first time to his second time. His SpO2 remained consistently at 95% during his climb when tested by guiding staff. He also noted a significantly lower heart rate, much more under control during his second attempt. His summit push day actually averaged a heart rate of 107 and he maxed out at 145, whereas in 2023, his heart rate was really all over the place, very high, between 140 to 150 and as high as 160. This was a result of him just being unable to control his breathing. He did a lot of hyperventilation on his way up the first go around. He said he had no struggle with that hyperventilation as well as with sleep, and he was able to maintain mental composure, which is very closely tied to how somebody breathes, much better than in his first attempt. Quote, expedition breathing protocols were a major contributor to that. So I want to note that this is Dave on the summit at nearly 7,000 meters. What I want to note about Dave's experience is that he put in the work to produce these results. And I don't ever guarantee any set of results for any of the case studies we looked at. Of course, these are just sample experiences, but if somebody puts in the work, obviously you can see some great results on the mountain. So, where can I go from here? You might be asking yourself that. Let's start with a few free resources that I offer out to everybody. If you want to do all of the initial breath assessments, we call that the Recal Breath Index. You can go to that link, assessment.recal.training, or use the QR code there. And you've already done 3 of these assessments. You can finish with the final 2 assessments. This is basically 5 assessments that show you where you're at with your breathing today and the specific areas where you can then improve, especially leading up to an expedition. It'll show you things both on the biochemistry side of your breathing, which is how your body exchanges gases, regulates your blood pH, how your body delivers oxygen throughout it, and also the biomechanics. What type of lung expansion that you experience, what's the efficiency of your airflow in your breathing. Again, when doing these, I do advise you to do it before any caffeine or food for the day. That'll give you the best baseline. That is the Recal Breath Index, and I do encourage you to go to that link, assessment.recal.training. The second thing I want to offer out to everybody here is joining our Basecamp, the community-driven mountain training platform. We have created a custom-built platform for all of our mountain athletes to go to, and it's a place where, yes, you can get a lot of breathwork training. You can also enjoy joining a live stream coaching session. There are challenges on here. You can get achievement badges and things like that, all on this custom built, almost social driven, community driven training platform. And that's just simply at basecamp.recal.training. And I also want to offer you the chance to join a free coaching session. I coach sessions every Monday at 8:04 a.m. USA Mountain Time. That's 7 a.m. obviously out on Pacific Coast time. By the way, 8:04 is the 29,032nd second of the day, which is the equivalent of the height of Everest in number of seconds in a day. Yes, I know. Cheesy, cute. Yeah. Um, the way that you would access these coaching sessions is inside Basecamp on the left-hand side. You can see the weekly live stream coaching. And when you're in there, I also call to your attention to RSVP to the live stream coaching sessions. That way you'll never miss a coaching session. So these are oftentimes focused on recovery because people are coming back from a weekend's worth of strong training typically, but I do pepper in some respiratory muscle training, some carbon dioxide training, some hypoxic training as well. All right, now I want to introduce you to the big system, which is the overall picture, the summit ready system. If you recall, this was our summit process: survey, unlearn, muscle strength building, mountain simulation, integrate into all of your training, and then test, taper, and trust. The summit ready system is a suite of things where you have an online course, you've got a Training Peaks app integration if you use Training Peaks for your training, and then you also have a workbook related to this too. The online course and this entire Summit Ready system, it does the high altitude simulation training exercises, it does the respiratory muscle training exercises, it does the lung capacity development exercises. It also comes with coach on call support. And I threw out there, by the way, some dollar figures of just the value of these things. Coach on call support system and community support along the way during your Summit Ready system. And it has something that we call the Expedition Breathing Playbook, which you might have seen Dave a moment ago mention that those protocols that he did on the mountain itself. So this, as a whole, is the tip of the summit, I guess, of the Summit Ready system, and gives you an idea of the value of these things. And that total value of just these components is $1,425. Now we have a new offer though coming in March. And in that offer, um, we throw in bonuses of value of $100 being the Breathwork equipment bundle, which includes things like the mask, like a belt, a Buteyko belt that goes around your waist to help resist that the air from moving in your rib cage. It's kind of like the dumbbell for breathwork training. You also have an altitude readiness and risk reduction toolkit, which is a newly created item that we're throwing into our overall Summit Ready program. You also can get that schedule integration framework because I know everybody's busy out there. So how do you actually fit this training program into your schedule? And then lastly, you get an age resilient training guide for those with more wisdom, more years, more experience. For those of you more senior mountaineers that are going up at high altitude, we do have a training guide in how you can adjust your training for you. That total value is $2,425. Now, in March, we are going to offer this for only $425, or you can choose to do a 6-month payment program at $95 a month. So this is the total suite. This is the Summit Ready system, the Coach on Call support, the Expedition Breathing Playbook, the equipment bundle, and all the guides and playbooks for $425 starting in March when we roll this out. And if you're interested in this, I would love for you to drop your name, email in the chat. You can obviously send that just to the host and panelists, myself, if you want to do that, to keep your email private, of course. But if you drop your name and email there, or you can email me at anthony@recaltraining.com, and I will get you on that list pre-launch of this program. That way I'll keep you updated for when we go ahead and launch, and that way you can dive into the full Summit Ready system. So I want to leave you with one last note here before we jump into Q&A. And we're right about at that hour mark. So I think I hopefully nailed it. This is what Lisa Thompson has to share. Lisa is the second USA-based woman to summit K2. She said, quote, "As both a high altitude climber and a coach that prepares other people for mountain adventures, I can't overstate the value of Recal's breathwork training program. I've seen firsthand how this program helps my athletes acclimatize more efficiently, recover faster, and perform their best. Recal is a game changer for anyone looking to optimize their experience on the mountain, whether you're tackling your first high altitude trek or aiming at more technical summits." So with that, I want to go ahead and open things up to Q&A. And of course, you can drop your name and email, and I'll be sure to share with you that March special information.
Whoa, my mind is blown. That was such a great presentation.
And Mary,
You've
I
done it
nailed it on
again.
time. Yeah, right.
I'm
I was
sold.
talking pretty fast there at the end. So for those of you
No.
that like want the research and science again, I'm happy to share with you links and all those things. If you just drop your email, I can definitely do that for you.
Oh, wonderful. And this has been recorded, so if you did not take notes, fear not. Okay. Questions, questions, questions. Earlier in the presentation, we had a question about Diamox and how it relates to breathwork training. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yes, that is a wonderful question. So simply put, for those of you that maybe don't know what Diamox is, just a bit of a backup, it stimulates your breathing. Simply put, it makes you breathe more often than you normally would, and hopefully it forces you to also breathe more deeply than you normally would. My thoughts on that are people have seen good results with that. I am not someone that's going to recommend or deny any sort of medication. So I want to make that clear. I'm not here to provide medical advice on that. What I have seen from people that have taken Diamox is, aside from very few negative consequences, things like having to pee more often. Generally, I think people have seen good results with that. But the one thing that I will note is because it quote unquote artificially causes you to breathe more times per minute than you normally otherwise would, it's going to tax your breathing muscles more. And remember what we talked about earlier was when you arrive at altitude already, you're going to automatically experience a higher respiratory rate, which has the likelihood of then fatiguing your respiratory muscles. So even if you're doing diamox, actually almost especially if you're doing diamox, I would advise you to train those respiratory muscles so that they don't fatigue with this extra workload that you're going to be putting it under, not only at altitude, but then layering on diamox, which forces you to breathe more often. This is I'm a little bit careful here. I don't want to say much more than that, but that is my opinion slash a little bit of insight on diamox for you.
Nice. Oh, fascinating. We have a question from Justin. What is the lower and upper limit on bouts of maximum breathlessness in a given breathwork training session? That's a mouthful.
Okay, can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah. What is the lower and upper limit on bouts of maximum breathlessness in a
Okay.
given breathwork training session?
Lower and upper limit on maximum bouts of breathlessness. Oh
Yes.
boy. Well, it depends on what metric we're talking about. If you may have been referring to that maximum breathlessness test, um, I mean, it can be anywhere from I've had clients that have started a breathwork training program with me and they've only done 8 steps. That might be a metric that you could use for maximum breathlessness, a bout with breathlessness. It could be just 8 steps. You could have experienced something like, yeah, below 10. And then I have clients that have trained their way to taking over 100 steps. Um, so there's a big spectrum there. What I will say is, in an attempt to actually answer that question, and not just say, hey, there's a big range. The people that surrender to the feeling of breathlessness, which I should note is really a result of the rise in carbon dioxide in their blood. So the feeling of being out of breath is related not to, in 99% of the situations, it's not related to a lack of oxygen. It's almost always related to the rise in carbon dioxide in the blood, AKA you haven't been able to exhale enough of that carbon dioxide off. This is what makes you feel out of breath. And so if you're training and you're dealing with these bouts of breathlessness, the people that have the best results are those that start to train their carbon dioxide tolerance through a series of breath hold exercises. For that person I know that mentioned they're a free diver, you've probably done some carbon dioxide tolerance breath hold exercises before. And if you can train your body to tolerate carbon dioxide more, then that feeling of breathlessness won't be as strong. It won't be as panicky. And that's really where you can start to make these key adaptations as you train for the mountain. Um, uh, Maybe also one final note is if you're looking at that metric of the carbon dioxide tolerance test as the bout of breathlessness, um, I've seen people on that only be able to do a 20-second exhale, but then I've seen people do a 95-second exhale before. So again, it's really kind of all over the board. I hope
Nice.
that answered the question.
I think so. We have a question from Richard. Also, my question. I mean, some of us it's busy, so much like busy with training and stuff.
Yeah.
How much additional time will this training take? Can be added to an
Ah,
additional workout? Like, what's the
yes.
yeah, like what's the time commitment?
This is a good question. Thank you. Yes. I should have maybe mentioned this. So, um, generally speaking, you can do breathwork training and get a lot of the benefits out of it, almost the full package of benefits by doing a 15-minute period 6 times a week. Okay. 15 minutes, 6 times a week. Now, that's for the standalone breathwork training exercises. But if you remember, as part of that summit process, and I'm going to maybe jump to that slide. If you remember, as part of the summit ready process, we we talked about integration. How do you actually integrate what you're doing in your breathwork training into your overall training? This is where you can start to integrate the nasal breathing habit, and then you're automatically training your carbon dioxide. As you wear this sports mask for some of your zone 2 training on a Stairmaster, you are developing stronger respiratory muscles because this is resisting the air with it you breathe in, and it's going to train your diaphragm. So you end up spending, okay, 15 minutes 6 times a week on standalone breathwork training protocols, but then you're integrating it into all of your training and getting a lot more out of your training and developing your breathwork training along the way. So it's not an extra amount of time. It's just being more conscious about how you then bring what you're learning in your breathwork training into your overall training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. 15 minutes, 6 times a week. I'm sold.
Yeah,
That
right.
is a great return on investment. Okay, any final, okay, we have another question in the chat from Lauren. Is there a particular sports mask you'd recommend?
Yes, and by the way, I can send this link out to you after the fact. But yes, the sports mask that I train with and coach with is the Oxygen Advantage sports mask. Again, it is from a breathwork training company, Oxygen Advantage. I can certainly send out the link to everybody for that. Um, it's good. It's very simple. It's just got a slider up in the front. I'm going to hopefully have this get picked up. High, low, medium setting for the air resistance. It's super simple. There's not really much to it, but this is the one that I recommend for my clients.
I think I have found it and I can drop it in the chat.
Sure.
It's a UK company.
It's yes, they're based in Ireland. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay. We'll drop it in the chat. Let me know if this is correct.
Yeah. And I also this without clicking on it necessarily, that does look good. I don't want to throw
Okay,
off the
wonderful.
presentation.
Yes.
But it's oxygenadvantage.com, so I think that's
Okay,
good.
wonderful.
Um, for though I saw a question, Richard asked what you can do before March. That is a great question. So, of course, right now we've got our online training programs still being sold at recal.training is our URL, recal.training. You can go to that website, and of course, you can buy the existing training products. It's just in March, we're bundling everything together and running that special um, for 425 for all of that high value stuff. But if you're curious to starting a breathwork training program immediately, not only can you go to that website, you can, of course, email me once again at that email, which I'll put on here, which is just simply anthony@recaltraining.com.
Wonderful. All right. I think we have answered all of the questions, which
Okay.
is wonderful. Anthony, thank you so much for this presentation. It was amazing. My mind is blown even more than it was the last time you joined us. So thank you so much.
That's good. You set a high bar for me, so I'm happy. At least I came close. So yeah,
You delivered, you pole vaulted right over the bar. So thank you for
nice.
that.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, and for everybody here and for your attention. I hope we delivered on the goal of making it interactive, somewhat fun, getting through the science as best we could, and hopefully really useful for you all.
Nice. And Anthony, one final question from me to you. What
Yeah,
is the trip that you are going to be training for this year?
yeah, that
Like, what's on your agenda?
that's a nice question, Mary. Well, so as I was just mentioning to you, my 2026 hasn't been quite as adventurous as I would like it to be. I've got a lot of work projects on the horizon, but if everything goes well, this autumn I will be headed to Nepal, and I want to climb something. I don't know what that is yet, and of course we can obviously talk about that. But my goal is something in Nepal, which will be my first time ever in Nepal. If I can get the business things done and out of the way, then I can actually have the clear headspace to go try to accomplish something in the Himalayas.
Wonderful, Anthony. We are rooting for you. You will make it to Nepal.
Thanks, Mary.
We'll manifest it. On that note, thank you all so much for tuning in. Check out our YouTube channel in just a couple of days, and you can check out this recording.
See you.
Bye, everyone.